Welcome to Creation in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Carl Ball, founder and director of the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas. The title to today's program is Crunch the Numbers, Part 2. Now, there's a reason for this special program, and you really need this information. You see, math is the language of science. And we have a comparison of the theory of evolution and the concept of creation. We need to see objectively how each would fare under unbiased mathematical examination. And I've asked to come to the studio today a dear personal friend of mine, in fact a colleague, with 38 years of career mathematics professorship under his direction, and 35 of those as a math professor at Kilgore High School, more than 20 of those as head of the math department, 13 years paralleling those as adjunct professor of math at Kilgore College. He's a graduate of Texas A&M University and Stephen F. Austin University, an esteemed colleague and a career mathematician who knows what he's talking about. I'd like to welcome Professor John Heffner. Professor, it's always a privilege to have you on the program.
Thank you. It's good to be here again.
You bring a mathematical verification of data, and that's what we want. We don't want to simply say, I believe it because my grandmother believed it, or I believe it because the professor said so. We need to be able to think objectively.
Yes.
And I think our students need this information. And the consequences are rather far-reaching. If creation is true, but we're educated out of even considering it as a proper concept, then we're going to face a creator lacking. On the other hand, if evolution is true, we need to be able to verify it mathematically, which is the language of science, and need to be able to verify it scientifically. And for our audience to know where we are, this is an illustration, as we did in the last program, but let's not assume that everyone remembers everything said in the last program or even watched the last program. So, in a nutshell, the theory of evolution is illustrated into this Tower of Time from a professional publication, stating or assuming that planet Earth originated about 4.6 billion years ago, and the first living systems, bacteria, originated about 3.5 billion years ago, according to this illustration. And then we have soft-bodied creatures and crustaceans evolving, and finally the trees and the conifers evolving. And that embraces the Paleozoic, dim, distant past. Then the introduction to the Mesozoic, the age of the dinosaurs. We're all intrigued with those. Finally, about 64 million years ago, the introduction, according to that theory, introduction of the Cenozoic era, and that brings us to modern man. And according to that theory, all of this is embraced and assumed to be true, even mathematically, by evolutionary concept. Professor, how many people do we have alive on planet Earth today?
Well, the last published data I've seen is about 6.5 billion people on planet Earth. And I wanted to mention that, you know, I've come to believe in the term healthy skepticism.
Yes.
I think it's healthy to examine things, not to swallow everything.
Yes.
There's always been, you know, mistakes and scams even, and carpetbaggers and all of that stuff. And so in the realm of science, I think it's good to examine everything with a healthy, open skepticism. And unfortunately, in many science settings, that does not exist. You're not allowed to question certain amounts of Darwinian litany.
That's tragic.
And one is, you know, pretty much this is the story of evolution, and this is the only game in town. And oddly enough, we're not necessarily advocating creation be taught, you know.
No, we are really, examining the data.
I would not want somebody teaching it that didn't believe it anyway.
Yes.
But we do ask for the truth to be taught.
Yes.
And that's all. Just the truth. Just don't promote any lies. You know, the late Stephen Gould at Harvard said that what happens is textbooks copy from previous textbooks. And once they're in a book, they become effectively cocooned, once they're ensconced in textbooks, and become effectively permanent. And it is perhaps generations later before that data is just so flawed and so widely known to be flawed that it is taken out.
Well, if ever.
If ever. But you've had generations of students go through believing that, and of course our poor overworked teachers are just teaching what they were taught. They're not on the front lines, you know, of research, maybe knowing all the flaws that are there. And the science of mathematics enables us to really examine the two claims, I think, of creation and evolution, because we start with the answer. We start with 6.5 billion people.
Population.
We agree on that.
Yes.
Well, that's probably the only thing, but now, is their scenario the one that got there, the evolution scenario, or is it the biblical, historical scenario that is the accurate one?
Well, let's give, since you're the math professor, let's bring the audience up and give an encapsulation of what we talked about last time so we don't leave anyone out. Which is correct?
Yeah, which is correct. Just quickly recapping what we've covered. Since the massive death event that the history book of the Bible says occurred about 4,500 years ago, coming from 8 human beings that it says were the survivors, the human survivors, at the rate of 2.5 children on the average per family, does result very easily in 6.5 billion
Yes, within
people.
Standard population growth statistic calculations.
Exactly. These are the biblical data, and this is the actual answer. On the other hand, the printed appearance of Homo sapiens 500,000 years ago in well-accepted biology books at the same rate would result in a ludicrous number of people, as evidenced by actually displaying that number. Now,
2.45 times 10 to the 990th power?
Exactly.
There are not that many electrons in the universe.
That's right.
There's not enough space for that many bodies in the universe.
And this number was not published in this textbook where that claim was made. That's my point exactly. Had they crunched the numbers, they would see, whoops, this is not the 6.5 billion we know we have.
And some suggest that it's not 500 million or 500 million or 500,000, but up to 1 million years.
The popular press claims they found a 1,000,000-year-old human tooth, meaning humans were here 1 million years ago. Well, this number would just be more ridiculous. And
let's crunch the numbers.
And on an earlier program, we talked about the death event known as Noah's flood did reduce human population. We believe accurately, it's accurate, that it was down to 8. And genetically?
Because, and let's let the audience in, because from those named people, we can actually trace the tribes and civilizations that populate planet Earth. We can actually trace them back to those people.
Well, and I've seen it in print, in secular sources, that every man comes from one of 4 lines, and Noah had 3 sons, you know, and so if you've got 4 men right there.
Yes.
And anyway, we know the population growth would have been very rapid early due to genetic vigor, the lack of genetic load, you know, not a polluted environment, a pristine new Earth, basically.
Plus
and all of
space
that.
Then to...
plenty of space, of course.
To conquer.
Now, in modern times, as early as 1988, we see the search for Adam and Eve has found, they weren't the biblical Adam and Eve, but they just used the names. They've looked at an international assortment of genes and picked up a trail that lead everyone to one single woman from whom we're all descended.
Isn't that interesting? Well, how long ago?
Well, according to 10 years after this story broke, Science Magazine has a published date of concerning when this mitochondrial Eve, as they dubbed her, lived based on the new clock mutation rate. She would be a mere 6,000 years old.
Oh,
that's very biblical sounding, isn't it?
Certainly, and all from secular source.
Yes, that's right.
We're crunching the numbers.
So the math points to that 6,000-year time frame of the mother of all living. And it reminds me of Genesis 3:20. Adam called his wife's name Eve, for she was the mother of all living.
The mother of all living.
And we live in an age where it's verifiable.
Mathematically and scientifically.
Exactly.
Biochemistry and microbiology.
But it even gets more exciting.
If we have a mitochondrial Eve just 6,000 years ago, have we been able to trace an atom?
Oh, I can't wait to show you.
Oh, well, let's go to the new data.